Here we go.
Thank you. So as a preliminary matter, this is Gary Bella, the chair of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Since Kathy has everyone on mute, just raise your hand, I'll see that. So Kathy, I see you're on. Don Green is on. Bill Gordon is on. Bill Sherman, welcome. Good. We have a quorum now. He's on. Peter, I don't see where Peter Halley disappeared to. He was on a minute ago. Our vice chair. I assume he'll get back on. Those are the members of our committee who are right now on the call.
Yeah, Peter was here. He popped up.
I know. He must have lost the connection and he's probably dialing in again. So I'll continue. The anticipated speakers on the agenda, we only have one anticipated speaker who I'm delighted to see that John Brescher has joined us. And John, I see you're here, so thank you.
Thank you.
So let me go along and talk about the rest of the script. Good morning. Good morning. Open meeting of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers. It's being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature some public comment. For this meeting, Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is convened by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided, members of this body, are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. With respect to the ground rules, we're turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I'll introduce the speaker on the agenda. After they conclude, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. In the meantime, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. And please remember to speak clearly. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. With respect to public comment, to the extent that the chair affords public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom, those who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by the chair. And each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So that's the script that I've finished reading. I see Peter Halley has not got back on, huh? No, not yet, huh?
Oh, but Peter Kahn has joined us.
Oh, Peter.
Here
Kahn,
comes Peter. Peter's coming back right now.
Oh,
So
good.
we have
Peter's
both.
here. Oh, great. Peter Kahn's here. All right. So now, and Peter Hall's here. Okay, now we have a quorum. So now we can go to the first item, which is the approval of the proposed minutes. So we had a lengthy meeting last time, talking a lot about, we had a presentation by Act Now on short-term rentals. And Kathy did a pretty good job, or an excellent job, I would say, of summarizing all the various comments. I must say I'm a little cautious about all of this because we're not going to turn our meetings into referendums on Act Now's proposals this time or any time thereafter. Although if we come to conclusions about positions we should take, we should do so. But last meeting, we did spend a lot of time on Act Now's proposal, the short-term rental proposal, because that was our subject. And today we're going to have some discussion about it as a secondary item or a third item on the agenda, second or third item on the agenda. But anyway, with that cautionary comment, I'd like to first recognize our first speaker. Now, John Brescher is the chairman of the Town Government Study Committee. And John is a hardworking lawyer resident of Nantucket. And as all of the lawyers of Nantucket know, they've been working flat out for the last 8 months. And fortunately, John has been able to offer us an hour of his time today. The Town Government Study Committee, I'll let John talk about it. It's amazing that it's a committee that was set up for, in theory, a year or two of duration, has now lasted 4 or 5 years and has been morphing into something that is looking at other aspects of improving town government, and John can talk about that. But the most important thing I wanted to say before John starts is that one of the reasons we, the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers, were interested in the Town Government Study Committee is that we were many of us were very concerned with the poor turnout at the annual town meetings when important town decisions were being made by interest groups. And because so few people would attend these meetings, that any particular interest group that had a strong interest would just show up en masse. And because there were only a handful of people that showed up at the meeting in comparison to our total Nantucket population, they seemed to carry the day. So some of us thought that that's probably not the right form of government we need to have in Nantucket these days. And some other people thought that as well. So the Town Government Study Committee was set up to do that. Interestingly, with what is going on in the town these days, with the controversial issues, whether we're talking about funding our island home, whether we're talking about short-term rentals, whether we're talking about there's a lot of very controversial issues that are in the works these days, many of which, including that proposal, the land bank proposal as well, to use some of that for affordable housing. When you think about all these issues, it's perhaps likely that maybe there will be a good representation of voters attending these town meetings, and that's how democracy is supposed to work. Anyway, I think I've talked enough. I'll let John tell us what they're doing and what the next steps are for the Town Government Study Committee. Thanks, John.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, everyone, for attending on a lovely Saturday morning. So we've been doing the Town Government Study Committee for, I think it's been about 3.5 years now. Time flies when you're having fun. And we've been tasked with looking at all aspects of government. It sort of started, it effectively started with just a charter review. And that is our primary focus, to make sure that the charter still sort of functions. And we've been looking at that from, excuse me, both a micro view as well as a macro view. Sort of Gary hinted at sort of the elephant in the room being town meeting, and that's really the overall operation of town government, or the legislative body of town government being town meeting. Is it still effective, et cetera? So over the last 3 or so years, we've been looking at this. We were on track to make a report to town meeting, or I should say 2020 annual town meeting, but then we got a bit derailed due to COVID. Candidly, we didn't meet for about 4, maybe 5 months, because no boards or committees were allowed to meet, I think, as I'm sure you're aware. And so we've been getting back into things. It was albeit somewhat slowly, but we're getting back into the swing of trying to get a report together for this year's annual town meeting. So what we've identified within our report, and I believe I sent that to Kathy and Gary, and if I didn't, I'm happy to do it as soon as I get back to my desk on Monday morning. So basically, it's just an update of where we are as a committee, what we've been doing, sort of what items we've been looking at, what items we have not been looking at. We've been looking at such small things as changing the audit committee to make it more in line. We're having town council review the the charter, to make sure that it is in line with all Mass General laws. And then we've been looking at such sort of larger pictures as town meeting, and does that function, and sort of where we go from there, or what we do. The one thing that I can say with confidence over the last 3.5 years is that there's an underlying theme of education that's needed. And we've noticed that a lot of the, I don't want to call them issues, but concerns that have come up could be addressed, or not addressed, but are a systematic problem of misinformation or lack of education. Now, it could be as simple as people not understanding the mechanisms of town government. And I should also say that it's an interesting experience as a town government study committee, because of our 6 members, 3 of us have been municipal employees, and I think others have been all on elected boards, or appointed officials. It's just interesting that the 6 of us on that committee are, I don't want to say like that we're well educated, but we're well versed. We're familiar with the mechanics and operations of town government. So with that in mind, we can sort of appreciate the nuances of the HDC charter and saying, oh, well, it doesn't make sense that you're going to appeal to the select board, because why is the select board going to start ruling on HDC matters? That's just one example. But the point that I'm getting at is that it's been interesting for us as sort of 6 individuals who've been entrenched in the wonkish nature of the town charter, the town bylaws, et cetera, for the last 15, 20 years, to appreciate that that a lot of the concerns that people have, that we've noticed, stem from not being experienced, or lack. It's awful to say lack of education, but it's that the tools of education aren't available. In other words, that our zoning code is an excellent, I'm going to pick on the zoning code. Our zoning code is an excellent zoning code. It really is. It really sort of the gold standard of to being in line with Mass General laws. However, it is incredibly confusing to the layperson to try to understand, oh, is there a is there a summer work moratorium? What about a noise bylaw, a light bylaw, et cetera? And we realize that not only is that things like the code can be somewhat confusing, but for an everyday citizen to go to the town and say, hey, my neighbor is starting their leaf blower at 5 in the morning and it is really a nuisance. What do I do? It would be really helpful if somewhere within the building department or the town's website or wherever you could see, hey, here's sort of a flow chart, or a nice pamphlet, or some indication of saying this, if you have this type of problem, here are the channels that you have to go down. Here's what you can do. Here's who you can talk to, etc. And so that's sort of the immediate form of education that we've noticed, and that we've been making suggestions to town administration and to other town bodies that, hey, we should be trying to do something to make, for lack of a better term, make the town government more user-friendly, so you don't have to be entrenched in town government, or an expert in the zoning code to know what to do, or even where to go. And then we look at that, we notice that same sort of education issue, and we've looked at it from a larger model too, or larger scale, being town meeting. And that, I mean, that is the legislative body. It is, I don't know if all of you have ever had the pleasure of reading through and parsing every word of the town meeting warrant, but it will put you to bed. I mean, it is 160 pages of pure legislative wonkish verbiage. And so it's an interesting point that people will attend, some people will attend town meeting. There was an example about 2 years ago. Somebody a gentleman attended town meeting, and I'm not going to name names, and I don't mean to pick on him. But he said at town, he started calling some of the warrant articles up for discussion, and he sort of apologized and said, well, I was told I didn't need to know anything about these and we could talk about them now. And sort of the collective audience in the room was just, oh no, you're supposed to look at these ahead of time. You're supposed to ask ahead of time, please, not now, not now. And so that idea of educating the public or educating the voters when it comes to these warrant articles is something that we've noticed is a problem is something that would make town meeting or the legislative function of the town more effective. And that's been sort of the challenge. And that's where we last left things with town administration during our last update. Saying what we've noticed is that there is a need for education, and how we go about doing that. We don't have a magic answer for that, or at least from the large scale model of town meeting. We sort of have the smaller ideas of, well, put the pamphlet up on at the building department, or when it reopens, or put these helpful flow charts on the town website. But it is a very good question of how you are able to have informed voters at town meeting. And so part of that, which is a great segue into Gary's comment about representative town meeting. The theory, I don't think the last time we spoke, we had taken our field trip to Falmouth. If we have, I apologize for sort of reiterating, and perhaps maybe Tucker Holland shared this with you, but our committee went to Falmouth because Falmouth has representative town meeting. And it was a absolutely fascinating discussion over there, because they, as Gary pointed out, they said, yeah, we used to have special interest groups flooding town meeting. And after that, the town collectively voted saying, hey, we can't do this. We don't want special interest groups ruling town meeting. We should go to representative town meeting. The punchline of this joke is that they did this in 1918. I mean, they've been doing this for a while. It happened a long time ago for them. So the idea of representative town meeting has certainly been bandied about with our group. I don't know that we're in a position to recommend one way or the other. Frankly, I'm going to go back to the sort of the theme that we've come across with our findings is education. If the town is to ever get on board with representative town meeting, frankly, they need to be educated on what it would actually mean, what it would actually do, what it would actually look like. So we're trying to get, and I'm going to be sharing this with our committee next when we meet, I think either next week or in 2 weeks. We're going to try to get an objective report, not from the town government study committee, from sort of an outside source. Because as much as it would be nice to have a report come from sort of the internal body, I think it would hold a lot more gravitas, seem a lot more objectionable, not objectionable, objective, if it came from an outside source. And so we're working on trying to do that, because frankly, the idea of representative town meeting is a really fascinating one. Just very quickly, for those who aren't sure what it would look like, we don't exactly know what it would look like either. But the theory behind it is that the island would be drawn up into precincts or districts, and each district would have a set number of representatives, and those representatives would represent the interests of the members in that district and those representatives would be the ones who would vote at town meeting. The theory behind it would be, yes, this is terrific. You would have informed representatives who have a chance to digest all the town meeting warrant articles, can explain them to their representatives, the electorate, and say, how do you want me to vote? Do you have any concerns? And everyone could still speak at town meeting, but only those precinct captains or delegates or whatever you want to call them would be the ones who vote. The interesting sort of paradox of it all in terms of affecting this change, if it were ever to happen, is that the town meeting has to vote to change itself. So that's sort of that's part of the reason why any type of change for this, what we've realized is going to require education. And if we can somehow be assured that the voters are informed and educated and are knowledgeable on the issues, fantastic. Maybe there's a case for me to keeping open town meeting. If we think that the representatives are going to do a better job and that they'll be the ones who are informed, in theory, great. Again, candidly, going back to our trip to Falmouth about a year and a half ago, what some of the representatives in Falmouth said was, some thought it was the greatest thing that's ever happened to the town. Others said, well, that's great, but some of our representatives are still only reading the town meeting warrant like the day of the town meeting. Like, well, that doesn't help anything. So that's sort of where we are in terms of looking at these. We're focusing on the education aspect. We're trying to have that as a theme. We will be submitting some warrant articles that are just, again, called wonkish in nature. We've identified some problems, some concerns that have existed within the town, not entirely all within our purview. A lot of them can be sort of administrative changes, and we've suggested that things like creating, hey, a separate licensing board or a separate sewer commission, fantastic. That can be done administratively. It doesn't necessarily need to go through the charter or a change through town meeting. And then with town meeting, the idea being that we're looking into trying to get an objective report, and because frankly, it is a larger it's a larger issue. And the idea of if you take it a few steps further and say, okay, well, let's try to do this, or let's try to look into this. The logical question is, okay, what does it look like? And the idea of trying to draw up precincts on this island based on registered voters is a fantastic head scratching question. I mean, it is a paper worthy of a grad school student. It would be a fascinating question. And so we're hoping to get some more information from this objective report and at least present it to people and say, look, this is not, these are the options that we have in terms of town meeting, in terms of the legislative function of the government. You can either do open town meeting, you can do representative town meeting, you can get effectively a city council, or you could have a mayor. We don't have enough people for a mayor. You need a year-round population of 50,000, and we're not there. So it would leave three options, and it's educating the public on what they would look like if there is any hope for any change. And we're not necessarily advocating the change yet, but I think it's something that's worth looking at. And again, rather than trying to force a change upon people, we've realized that everybody we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't inform everyone to the best of our abilities. And so that is our next step. We're working on the educational component of this to see where it all goes.
Thank you, John. I have some specific questions for you, but before I go to those questions and also ask members of our committee whether they have specific questions, I forgot after talking about the minutes to get the approval of the minutes that Kathy submitted to all of us that were included.
Motion to approve.
Bill has made the motion. A second?
Second.
Committee, yes, Bill. And just raise your hands as I see. Okay, Dawn, Peter, Bill, John, Bill, myself. Okay, approved, Kathy, unanimously approved. So John, my first question to you, I recall, Kathy, yes?
We need to approve the agenda for this meeting as well.
Okay,
Motion to approve the agenda.
right. Second?
Second.
Second, all in favor, raise your hand. Okay, all approved, Kathy, thank you.
Sorry.
So John, the question I had is thinking about the representative type of form of government. You said something that just now that surprised me a little bit, because my theory was that today, where we have a handful of people who are interested in a couple of issues, those are the ones that show up at the meeting. And as you know, 80% of the people do not show up at the meetings. The voters don't show up at the meetings. I thought that when you have a representative form of government, as they do in Falmouth, where they have 222 representatives, I think it's 222 or something like that,
Mhm.
right? It's a couple of hundred, each representing a section of that community. And in theory, if they are doing their job, you mentioned some of them don't do their job. In theory, they find out what their constituents' views are, and then they go to the meetings, they read the articles before, and they act and tell, and they vote on behalf of their constituents. But you said something about talking about voting taxpayers. I had the impression that if we had a representative form of government, and if we determined that with respect to the island of Nantucket, instead of 200 or 225 representatives, we probably should have about, say, 90 representatives, okay? And therefore we'd have to segment, and I know that's, the devil is in the details. That would be very devilish to even think about doing that. That would mean that there'd be 90 folks who would be charged with representing all of their communities. But I've always assumed that in their representation of their communities, that the one or two people, say, from each group, maybe from Brant Point, right, they would talk to all of the residents of Brant Point, not just the voting taxpayers but the non-voting taxpayers of Brant Point, which is the issue that concerns us all of the time, that we pay all these taxes and we don't get a vote.
It's an interesting point, Gary. I don't know what Falmouth does. I don't know that they have as much of a seasonal population as we do. If they do, it's worth asking. How about this? I don't necessarily know that there would be a reason why the representative couldn't reach out to all the residents and say, "Hey guys, here you go. This is what we have. These are the warrant articles. This is what would impact us. This is what wouldn't impact us. Do you guys really need to care about Sconset zoning? Probably not, but here we are for Brant Point. Let's talk about flood elevations, etc." I think that would work. I mean, it's the nice thing about all of these is that although we have some, I think, templates or models, it could all be fluid. I mean, that's sort of the beauty of it. I mean, I think Falmouth has, I think they have, again, we'll pick on Falmouth because that's the one we've really researched. I think they have 3 representatives per district. And so, I mean, there's nothing to say we couldn't have 5, we couldn't have 2, we couldn't have 10. I mean, there are certainly ways to look at this differently. And I don't think anything should be set in stone, frankly. And I think it's a good idea to have people, to have the representatives, if we wind up going down that direction, to have the non-voting taxpayers reach out to them and say, "Hey, just so you know, we're funding a lot of this. Mind if we have a voice?" I mean, it's reasonable.
The summer residents could reach out to voters today. Those who live in Brant Point could talk to any year-round folks that live in Brant Point, not many of them probably, and try to influence their vote when they go to town meeting. There's no reason why you have to have a representative town meeting for summer residents to have a say talking to actual town voters. Right?
In theory. Peter?
Yeah, so John, I very much appreciate your coming and talking to us again today. And it's interesting to see, you know, the progress or lack of progress since the last time. But my question, because I think you've really put a finger on a big issue, not just for Nantucket, but nationally, is voter education, and not just on particularly what is up at this meeting or this annual meeting, but how the whole system works. And it strikes me that you know, one of the answers there is what sort of civics education that deals with the Nantucket is provided in the Nantucket school system, because you can start someplace. You have an immediate issue, but also you might over time lessen that by having some of the civics education tuned specifically to how things work on Nantucket. With respect to representative government, and the difficulty of having people basically vote themselves out of office, which you're asking the residents of Nantucket who go to town meetings to vote themselves out of office. That's always difficult. But I wonder whether there isn't an existing structure that is very familiar to everybody, and that, at least from my point of view, works pretty darn well. And that structure, by the way, is the select board. I, attended by Zoom a lot of, it's better than reality TV to watch the select board. And I'm really impressed by the the knowledge and dedication of the members of the select board and their judiciousness, I might also say. But why could under Massachusetts law, could the select board be elevated to like the city council or something like that? You don't want lots and lots of members because it makes meetings really, really difficult. But at present, the members of the select board are what I think what would be called at-large members. They're all members for the entire island. And maybe by adding a couple of seats to the select board and thinking about what are districts with different issues that need to be represented, have a combination of members who are either at-large or attuned to different districts. And just to finish that point off, vis-a-vis education and governance, it seems to me that Nantucket already participates in a representative government situation. That's it's representative or representatives to the state legislature. So that's not an unfamiliar aspect. I don't know what people think about their voice in the state legislature. Everybody always would like a bigger voice, but certainly, again, at select board meetings, I don't know whether we've had the Nantucket's legislative representative to one of our meetings. Again, I'm impressed with the knowledge of the person himself, I think currently now. And so they shouldn't really require a lot of education to think about how one would go to a representative form of government. I tend to think, although I haven't done the study, don't have the knowledge of this other town in Nantucket that has gone to the representative town meeting, that's really a step that it kind of is too complicated, not going to really improve things very much. And maybe you ought to be thinking about going right to a city council type of situation, if that's permissible under state law. And oh, by the way, everybody like me today can go to a city council meeting, and if they behave themselves, have a voice and talk to the city council directly at a public meeting. Thanks.
John, is there a city council alternative that we have?
There is, and I believe Barnstable has one. I want to say Barnstable has a council of nine or so, maybe 13. And it's an interesting, the discussions that we've had when we held our public meetings about this, it's very interesting because a lot of the electorate, or the electorate that showed up there, which again, we did not have a very high turnout, so take that for what it's worth, was concerned that they would not have a say. I think that there is something really attractive to some of the electorate about being able to directly vote at town meeting. And take that for what it's worth. The sort of the interesting counter argument to that is that in terms of efficiency, I don't know that there's much of an argument to be made against a council. In other words, because they are the legislative body, so they could, warrant articles are always the really sort of sexy topic. But the fact is that our budget only gets approved once a year. And that's a challenge. That is a true accounting challenge for the finance wonks within the town. and which is more often than not why we have an annual town meeting than a special town meeting. The idea, so that is, it is by its nature inefficient. There's no other way to describe that. So the council idea, they could pass a different budget every month, every other week, whenever they meet. They would be the legislative body within the town, and they would have the discretion to do that. I think Barnstable has its own mechanisms, how other warrant articles get approved, nominated, etc. So there are certainly lots of options. Again, it all will sort of stem back to the original sort of theme of what we've learned in terms of education and saying, look, these sort of objectively, here's what could happen. Here's how it functions, right, wrong, or otherwise. And I'll just add one quick other note to the efficiency side of things. I believe I don't know if it got approved at last town meeting because things were just weird with last town meeting. But the airport has submitted a warrant article, or had submitted a warrant article, which effectively gave the select board the discretion to approve budgetary items for the airport without having them go to town meeting. It's sort of I'm realizing I'm being somewhat inarticulate saying that, but it was a way for the airport to get, I don't want to say bypass, but they were able to circumvent some of the inefficiencies of town meeting, because they said, look, the airport's example was, look, we have a grant that comes up. You know, if the town spends $500,000, we can get a grant for 30 million, but we have to do it within 60 days. Why on earth do we have to wait a full year to go in front of town meeting for something that's going to be passed? It's inefficient. It doesn't make any sense. So Peter, there may be a way, I don't want to give false hope to anybody on this, but what I have learned throughout this is that although there are, quote, 4 forms of government, open town meeting, representative town meeting, a city council, and then the mayor, there is some flexibility within each model, so to speak. I mean, I think the 2 extremes are the open town meeting, where it's just an open town meeting, and the mayor, where it's just the mayor. The ones in between, I think there's some leeway in how you could tweak it. And the difficulty is trying to find something that would, assuming the people want the change, find something that would be palatable, and that you could educate them on and say, yes, this is a good idea. This is how this can work if this is where people want to go with it. But I think there are options at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that. Without doing anything really, you could, for example, up the city council's financial authority, and which I think is probably, I don't know what it is, but it's a very low number. Number one. Number two, even at the state level of government here in Florida, and I'm thinking of California too, and probably Massachusetts, probably every state, people can have citizen propositions. You get, and that is like a town meeting all over again. And so I think there are ways to perhaps get around a lot of the inefficiency. And that's really, I think, what we're seeing is inefficiency, and where the town meeting comes into play also a lot of tribal activity, if you know, for want of a better term. And so how do you, and Nantucket really is, population-wise, a small town, but budget-wise, it's probably one of the largest small towns in the world. Things need to be improved.
Don, you had some comments.
First of all, to keep this efficient, I think people want to speak should address the chair and then be called on to speak. We give more people a chance to say what they have to say. But first of all, I think I second the motion, Peter's thought that education should start in the schools on learning about town government. The other thing is looking over representation. A lot of the representation, because it's divided in precincts, it's just dirt. It's not really reflecting people's opinions in a certain way. A friend of mine recommended a book, which I haven't read yet, called Democracy Without Elections. And I said, well, this sounds like a pretty far-fetched idea, but how do we run our jury system? People are selected randomly to serve on juries, and that system has worked well. So I don't know if that is an idea of any kind that would be consistent with the laws, but the book is, again, it's called Democracy Without Elections, and it's by David Van Raybrook, Reybrouch. I'm going to read it because even looking at our national system, the representation is not truly representing the people of the United States. In fact, in the House of Representatives, more people voted for a different party than the one that sometimes gets into power. So we haven't yet figured out in this country how to truly get representation. And yeah.
No, please. Can you, I didn't want to forget. I was going to mention something about education, but please finish your thought. Sorry.
Well, so I think this almost has to go back to a drawing board, not to figure out how to divide people up into land, but how to divide them up in almost a random fashion as to their what issues are important to them, so they can be represented in a town. And so far, even the governments we live under don't really reflect that.
Anybody else on our committee like to have a, John, go right ahead.
I could speak to
Respond to
that. We have in Nantucket democratic election of our select board, and the elected select board also serves as our county commissioners, board of county commissioners. That board is already potentially as effective on short notice as a city council. But if I understand correctly, John, that's off the table. You don't get a chance to look at the possibility of amending the county charter to see if the role of the county commissioners could be expanded to serve in the interim between town meetings, for example, to vote funding or grant money or whatever for the airport. Things that need to be dealt with quickly without having the cost of a special town meeting. Why not explore that?
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea at all. And it's certainly one worth asking, and we can certainly look into it. And I can't say I know how the mechanisms of that would work versus adding it, just having the county commissioners do it as opposed to the select board. But hey, there are no bad ideas in terms of looking at this. I mean, truly, everything is sort of on the table, and it's worth exploring because there is such discretion on trying to find a solution. I mean, we have flexibility, I think.
But you've been at it for 3 some years. It only took us maybe a year and a half to get the whole town charter, the brand new charter with no precedent, and the new county charter, again, with no precedent in the prior several hundred years. It's only a year and a half. What's going on?
I know.
We talked about using the county,
motivated volunteers.
We were all volunteers, right? Just as you were.
Any other comments from members of our members of our committee? Is there anyone from, was that a hand, Bill? Peter? No. Anybody from the public who wants to ask John any questions? Yes, Rodney.
Hi, John. I think, I mean, we've talked, Gary raised it initially and it's been echoed, but this there's a real issue with Nantucket in terms of taxation without representation, which is reflected in this committee. Given that part-time residents contribute such an unusual percentage of the town's budget, and it's both direct, the direct tax revenue in terms of property taxes, et cetera, but it's also indirect revenue with, one of the issues we're going to discuss later, which is the, housing of vacationers in thousands of homes who provide short-term rentals. So really it's unusual and that part-time residents should really try and strive to find a way to have representation and a voice in such a unique environment. The other issue is participation. And there has been a suggestion that these meetings move to Zoom, given the unique nature of Nantucket. That one of the ways to break away from just tribal representation with whomever happens to be physically present in the middle of winter is to do these via Zoom. The last piece is, I think there needs to be some form of obligation to inform. And that again is exemplified by this short-term rental warrant, where I would say more than 90% of those affected had no idea that this was moving along in winter during a pandemic and affected so many people. And also the island itself, though many didn't necessarily realize it. But I think that is another issue that somehow has to be addressed on island in our situation.
If I may, I think they're all excellent points, and I think that it's going to be very interesting from sort of a town meeting, whatever it looks like, standpoint moving forward with sort of the influx of Zoom and how easy and how open it can be that way. I wish that I had a crystal ball to tell you what the town meetings are going to look like all over the state for the next 6 months to a year. For those who don't know, it looks like our town meeting has been pushed to June and is going to be held outside. I don't know how that's going to look exactly. It's going to be fascinating. But everybody's sort of learning as we go with this. But it's an excellent point to raise that there with the increased popularity of Zoom and other forms of communication, there's no reason why more of this information can't be disseminated.
John, thank you. We promised John that he'd only have to give up an hour of his family's time on Saturday morning. And he was kind enough to do that. And I appreciate his participation in this discussion. But I'd like him to stay on for 5 more minutes, because I just want to change the order of our agenda a little bit, because one of the other items on our agenda is to talk about the issue that is on our agenda. Robin mentioned it as well, and that is whether or not there's a way that we can be able to continue our meetings in a virtual fashion. In fact, I just want to remind you all that under the current laws, and I'm not the master of them, Bill Sherman is, and I'll go to him shortly, but under our current laws, my understanding is that when town bodies like ours meet, we are able to have people join our meetings electronically. The only problem with people who are joining the meeting electronically that are not physically present is that their attendance does not count for quorum purposes. And that would be the only change in the law. Now, I've kind of made Bill Sherman a committee of one with his extremely detailed knowledge and experience. on the island of Nantucket, ask them to start thinking about how it is that we might possibly seek to influence a change in the rules following the, hopefully, the end of the pandemic restrictions, which, we've seen a little bit of hope now as the infection rates decline and vaccination rates move up. And I know Bill has started looking at some of the issues now. So Bill, would you like to talk? And while John is here, he can hear you think about some of these questions we've raised.
I think you're ahead of where I am. I just answered the one question, if I understand correctly, and you sound like you have a better fix on it than I do. Once the governor's emergency orders, executive order ends, because the COVID-19 threat ends, then we're back to the open meeting law and we can't meet by Zoom. But perhaps you understand better than I do, Gary, that it might be possible, but you have a quorum issue.
Well, I'm our representative on the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Commission, and we started meeting all last winter. And I know that our meetings were on Zoom, but I attended electronically, and or at least before the pandemic, when I attended, the meetings were held in person. I attended electronically since I wasn't on island, and the only issue of my attendance electronically when the rest of the folks were in the meeting room was that I couldn't be counted for a quorum. So I know that is those are the rules that are in effect today. And the question is, if we were to go about trying to get that changed, what's the best way? I mean, I was thinking perhaps you should call the governor's office, speak to one of the governor's aides there, and just say the legislator, or maybe talk to our legislators from the island and say, what is the mechanism for us to, once the pandemic is over, to allow continued electronic participation, but allow it to be included for quorum purposes? I don't know how we find out how to proceed with that, because that would be helpful for our committee, obviously, because, we are seasonal for the most part, and some people who are thinking of joining our committee also are seasonal. And if it doesn't count for a quorum, it just means that we can't approve anything.
I trust your question is for John because you've asked him to linger.
Thanks, Bill. That's a really good one. My assumption was that when we used to have people join meetings, when we could have meetings in person, people were allowed to join, but they couldn't be counted towards quorum. I don't think I'd ever been a part of a meeting where somebody joined via Zoom or FaceTime. It was always just via a telephone.
Right.
So I don't know if trying to finagle that to say, well, telephones still won't count for the quorum, but Zoom would, provided that you're able to record. It's a really interesting distinction, and I'm happy to try to talk to some people about it, because frankly, it's not a bad idea at all. And it's not, I'm honestly not one that I had contemplated coming, assuming this all ends soon. It's really interesting.
Kathy?
Okay, and I think, John, just to add on to that, I mean, it's almost like our committee is different than a lot of the other ones, because we basically aren't on the island, and it basically would shut us off completely during a period of the year when there's so much activity going on with warrants and all of that, getting ready for town meetings. So to me, it's almost discriminatory to say we can't meet, because that's the only way we can. So throwing that out there.
And in the past, I've been on the committee for a number of years. We, in fact, have never met off season because we weren't permitted to. So we had no meetings until the first week in June. So John, you're going to follow up for us?
Yeah, I am really genuinely interested in how that would shake out. So yeah, I am happy to do that. That's cool.
I think that's a
Cool.
great issue. If the town government study committee really wants to make an impact,
There you go.
tell Rick Atherton that this is what I think is a really way for your committee to get a lot of support from the
Yeah.
people that pay most of the taxes. Don Green?
Yeah, just in tone of doing that, which I think is a good idea, for people who don't own computers or have internet access, something would have to be addressed as far as that goes.
Okay.
That's pretty simple. It's just a telephone call.
Yeah.
Well, you can't see them though.
Any other comments on that? Yes? No? All
Yeah,
right, so John, Peter, Hal, you had another
yeah,
comment?
I think, it just, as I'm reading what Gary read, what you read at the beginning of the meeting is the order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, which is GL. And frankly, in Massachusetts law speak, I don't understand what GL.C. is, but anyway, and probably general laws.
Yep.
The 30A section 20 probably just requires a legislative change to, 4 or 5 words or one sentence in GL law 30 section 38 section 20. Specifically, he goes down, and this is on the second page under item 2. Says the requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present in a specified meeting location as provided in the law just cited is hereby suspended. So I think it's just a matter of changing a couple of those words, with maybe a whereas clause. Whereas the pandemic has taught us that public meetings have been able to go forward successfully through electronic means. Therefore, these words are changed. Now that may require the entire legislature to do that, but
It would be, you would not want to have regulatory groups meeting by Zoom if physically possible to have. So it's really for advisory committees, not for regulatory.
yeah. But I think right now,
Bill, regulatory committees like the planning board, they're meeting now by Zoom.
Yeah, but it's not, it's post-COVID. I thought we were talking about post-COVID.
We are, but it just shows that it's possible to have regulatory action taken by Zoom if that's the best way to get full participation.
Yep. Okay.
yeah, and you can, even before this Zoom, as I recall, in a lot of those committees, you could participate as not as a member of the body, but as a member of the public by phone or video. Because I think I've participated in one or more meetings that way.
But I would hope that the governor could do this by executive action, the way we run our federal government, instead of waiting for the legislature to act, because that may take forever to make that little minor change. So anyway, thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you for adding to your committee's important agenda items. This one is now the most important, and have a good rest of your Saturday.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you all for all you do. Appreciate it, gang.
And thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
The next item on the agenda is we have a follow-up from our discussion on the discussion we had on a short-term rental law last time we met. Now, what I did in the interim, of course, and what I said we would be doing at the last meeting is to appoint a subcommittee. And I appointed that subcommittee, and Bill Gardner agreed to be the chair of that committee. And I asked Bill to work with the committee. I specifically kept the committee limited to 5 people, which is less than a quorum, because otherwise, every time they met, we'd have to have a notice and public and everything else. And that's not a way to get some thinking done for our committee. So Bill is the chairman of that committee. And Bill, I'd like you to give us some thoughts. I know you just started to think about this, And the questions I have, of course, is to what extent, do we feel that we have to take a position at all as far as our committee is concerned? Our committee represents, non-voting taxpayers, and there's a lot of those folks, and most are not in the short-term rental business. The majority are not, and so it's not an issue for most of those folks at all.
Right.
And I know there are people who in
Let
our,
me,
yeah, but go ahead, Bill. Tell me what your thinking is initially before you really start having some additional meetings.
Yeah, let me answer your question by telling you that what you just said is how we concluded our session. But I'll start back at the beginning. The first thing we did was to inadvertently exclude poor Bill Sherman from most of the meeting. And we apologized and he accepted our apology. And then we started out kind of asking ourselves, why are we here? I mean, what are we supposed to be doing? Are we supposed to be coming up with a recommendation that supports or supplements the Act Now proposal? Are we trying to decide whether we as a committee should be taking a position? Most of our discussion kicked around the different sub-issues. I know you're very concerned, Gary, about the discrimination issue of residents versus non-residents. And we talked about that. We talked about seasonal versus off-seasonal. We talked about the multi-investor issue. And we really concluded by saying that we did not at this time need to take a position or make a recommendation, that we would first want to see what the FinCom did and then regroup. That's pretty much where we are.
Well, I understand that, and I happen to agree with the fact that until, when we talked to the folks from Act Now last week, 2 weeks ago, they indicated that sometimes they change their proposal based on their discussions with the FinCom. I was glad that we had that meeting with them because clearly they heard different viewpoints from the members of our committee and also from members of the public. So I do understand that. By the way, Robin, you mentioned that you thought there was an information lapse about something that happened in the winter that the public didn't know about, the short-term rental proposal. And in fact, there is no lapse because it is not a proposal until that warrant is actually finalized and offered. And it's a private warrant. I mean, it's a private article by a private group making a proposal. It's not coming from the town. So I mean, there's no way you would know, or any of us would know, about stuff that private citizens or private interest groups may want to offer at the meeting, as long as they get it in time to for it to appear on the annual town meeting schedule. But I agree that we have to wait. As you've heard, my own position is with respect to the short-term rental issue. My only concern was whether or not there should be discrimination between the voting and the non-voting residents. The rest of it affects everybody equally, and whether or not something that they're proposing even has a possibility of passing, to me, sounds pretty remote. And I don't know what's going to happen between now and the time that people talk about it. But one thing I do know, our meetings are not the forum for providing information that is different than what Act Now is providing. I don't care what Act Now provides, and I don't want to use our meetings as a forum for people saying Act Now was wrong. They said this statistic and we have other statistics. All of that may be true. I think that the people who have the most concern about the short-term rental issues, as I said, it's a minority of our non-voting taxpayers. I think you folks ought to form your own interest group so you can communicate, you can exchange and share information, but our committee is not the right forum for you to provide that information to contest what Act Now says. Act Now keeps sending out these things, some of which, you know, we all look at and we say, that's a lot of baloney, but it doesn't matter to us. We don't even know if the warrant is going to be offered in the form that it is. So it is premature. And I think that what Bill and his committee have really concluded is we're going to have to wait until the FinCom has a chance to review that proposal. And when that proposal is offered and the FinCom has a chance to review it, all of the folks who are on the call here and other people who are interested in short-term rentals, you have the same opportunity, a much more important opportunity to speak to the issues that concern you. And they're very valid issues. We understand that. So
Gary, let me
that's the right
just,
forum.
yeah, let me just add that we discussed a number of these issues, and the others can speak for themselves, but I don't think any of us had a great deal of enthusiasm for the Act Now proposal as stated. And I don't think that any of us had any great enthusiasm for suggesting that the advisory committee become a critic or a reviewer of anything that Act Now puts forward. Quite the contrary.
Right. That's how I feel too. Don Green.
I was thinking whether the committee could even take a step back a little further. And because the issue really is not short-term rentals, it's what neighborhoods should look like and how they should be funding and affordable housing. The short-term rental thing was just to get revenue to either to deter people from certain things or to give money so that it could go towards affordable housing. This morning, and I would suggest people look at it on C-SPAN, they had someone from the Mercator Institute and George Mason University discussing affordable housing. And it was a very interesting discussion. And this is not on the government level. This is a research group looking at different ways to get affordable housing. And the biggest things were the zoning issues. What was the other one? And the funding, actually changing how the Section 8 vouchers would be given out, even as voucher or as cash. So people could spend the money on housing where they wanted to spend it and without as much regulation. So they could rent in neighborhoods that they couldn't afford before.
Don, you always talk about these national issues, and that certainly is a national issue. It certainly doesn't merely affect Nantucket, it affects affordable housing is a major issue all over. And as far as what Bill Gardner was saying as well, that we have to wait for the FinCom, there was one other thought that I had, and that is there are several other major issues that are coming up. And at this annual town meeting, you know, there's that whole question of the land bank proposal that Brook Moore has offered, and that'll be somewhat controversial. And the question that, as far as I'm concerned, I'd be interested in what my committee members feel like this. We should wait for the final. We might want to attend personally if we want the FinCom meetings, if we want to, but we haven't taken a position on anything as a committee because everything is still in flux now and we don't know what the FinCom will recommend. But at some point, those warrant articles will in fact be finalized. And when they are finalized, then the question will be, do we as a committee want to take a position as to the desirability or lack of desirability? Because based on what finally comes out of there, some of these things may be going nowhere. A lot of crazy things are offered, as you know, with all of these warrant articles, and many of them hardly even get a vote, right? They just get passed. And so we really need to wait for the finalization of those articles before, we decide as a committee whether we should be taking a position. And once we are at that point, we will have to decide how, in fact, we make our voice heard. This year, if the annual meeting is held in June, there might be some of us on island. So if some of us might have the opportunity to speak on that. Kathy, you want to say something?
Just quickly, I mean, we are an advisory committee to the select board and the FinCom. So if there
No,
are.
no, we're not. No, we're not. We are not an advisory committee to the FinCom. Take a look at our mission statement. It's just the select board. But we can make any comment we want to the FinCom.
But the FinCom usually joins our meetings for that very purpose. of
Well,
hearing what
Denise
we
is
have.
very nice about that.
Right, and so they are very interested in what we have to say or what our thoughts are. So I don't think we should keep it from them, because there could be influence, which if we choose to do so, that would make it so that the warrant article maybe could be something that's useful for everybody, or better than it is now. That's all. I think that's the reason we would, if we choose to, would take a position now, which might be a different position after it comes out and it's been modified, as Tobias said it could be.
I would like to add
Now, I don't.
that in the before the FinCom has its final determination of its position on the Act Now article, I would commend anybody, including you, Kathy, who have a particular concern, that you address it to Act Now, so that Act Now can modify their article in their discussion with the FinCom to avoid offending interests like your own. That is, somebody who just has a home that they rent out on a short-term vacation rental. You are not an investor who is completely removed from the island, simply trying to extract wealth by owning property and renting it out short-term. So
Right, I did reach out to them. They would not respond to me. That was the problem, because as an individual, they would not respond. So that's my concern.
okay, so you somehow you need to get your voice effectively, but I think it is right that ACNVT not take a position, because it's very difficult for us to honestly say we represent the whole of the non-voting resident community, the summer seasonal residents.
Gary?
Yes,
Peter.
Peter Kahn.
Traditionally, we can always change things, but you and I have both been on the board for some time, and in the past, what we have done is, as you say, wait for the FinCom so the warrants are there, and then we review them, and then we meet and make a determination of which ones we feel that we have an interest in and support. I mean, given the volume that goes before the FinCom, I mean, we just don't have the capacity, in simple terms, to deal with all the warrants. I mean, it makes a little sense for us to try to do that. I agree with Bill that, for example, with regard to the Act Now, individuals who feel strongly about this issue should make their voices known to Act Now to get their warrant in the shape that they would support. The FinCom doesn't necessarily, I don't know how that works, but even if they don't respond to you, they will, I'm sure they will read whatever it is you write to them, and they're going to read what's in the newspaper, whatever else. There are many ways to at least get your voice heard. But for this committee, we just don't have the time or capacity to be involved at this early stage. It's only after we see the FinCom position that we can then credibly respond to it.
Go ahead, Robin. I'll let you talk a little bit, but not much.
Okay. Gary, so with all due respect, I understand you say we should go and form another advocacy group. First of all, what Kathy said is true. I mean, I was on the phone with Act Now. They don't want to know. They're not interested. No modifications are welcome in terms of both email correspondence and phone calls. But Gary, what I would hope, and I think the reason there is such a large interest in this, is that as a committee of non-voting taxpayers, if you became aware that there were dozens or 100 or 200 constituents of the same type who were concerned about an issue, that you would voice and represent that issue. With this one, there are at least 1,800 who would have a material financial impact. So with all due respect, I understand the committee, the majority of the committee members are not affected, and I get that. But there are 1,800 families just by virtue of the registry that are. So
Thank you,
that's
Robin.
my main observation.
Thank you, Robin. Sam, I'm not going to call on you because your full name isn't on here. I don't know who you are.
He is, I have his name, that he's using a computer, that's his son's. His name is, let's see, Anthony Tomasiello.
Yep.
Muted.
Go ahead, Tony.
Hi. I don't know why my, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know why my name appears as Sam. It's my son's name. He has autism and he's my only son. But anyway, my wife and I own several properties on Nantucket. We first came to Nantucket when my father was the district court judge in the late 80s. And my wife had the smarts to tell me that I was too cheap to pay the rent down there, so we should buy a house. So we bought a modest multifamily, two-family house on Pine Grove Drive in 1990. And then it appreciated in value quite a bit in 2006. We sold it and we bought a different house on Surfside Road from Jay Harmon, who's one of the owners of the brewery. And we rented it out somewhat. And we stay there too in the summertime, but we rent it out. And and then the last few years, we bought two other houses, one on Codfish Park, a 1-bedroom, and also one on Vestal Street, a 2 or 3 bedroom house. So that's the history with me in Nantucket. I did not know of the existence of your committee until just recently. Hi, Sam. Please go upstairs. So I didn't know about the existence of your committee. I was aware from We Need a Vacation Rental and a few other places that ACNOW was submitting, or was in the process of submitting, a warrant to a request for a warrant to be placed on the annual town meeting. But I have a couple of questions. I happen to be an attorney, and I'm not trying to hold myself out as an expert in zoning or land use law, although that is one of my areas of practice, or municipal law. But I do know a couple of things. The couple of things that I do know is the following. If this is a zoning article, which I hope it is, then several things will come into play. Number one, it takes.
Sam, I have to stop you, Sam.
Okay.
You're getting
It's
into
not a
the
zoning article.
weeds. We're not going to get into the weeds on short-term rental. We're just not going to get into the weeds on that because we don't know what the final proposal will be.
Okay.
It's our proposal. It's ACNOW's proposal. ACNOW is a private organization. Their proposal, the way it reads now, probably doesn't have a chance of being passed by the town. Not a chance as far as I'm concerned. No problem. I hope they don't change it at all because it is so contradictory to what the economics of the island need. But it's not our issue. It's not an issue for the advisory committee for non-voting taxpayers. And getting into the details of zoning, things like that, that's not for us to, we can't
Well,
spend
no,
our time talking
was-
about those things.
I was only making an observation. The only observation I would make is that it takes a 2/3 vote if it's zoning and it only applies prospectively. So that's just just
Okay.
wanted to make those two observations.
I have no idea.
Sure.
Okay. Well,
Gary, if I just could come back in on this, we're
Yes.
not saying that we're never going to take a stand on this. What we're saying is that at this juncture, until it becomes a warrant, we're not going to weigh in. And once it becomes a warrant, as we have traditionally done, we have looked at all warrants that we think affect our quote unquote constituency. And it may well, based on this, if it does go forward, we would likely, make it clear that we're against it. But we're not in the position of editing, micromanaging somebody else's proposal, or or, you know, and that's up to individuals who may be on this call. So I don't want anybody to get the impression that we're just passing on this issue. That's not the case. Right now, we're waiting until we see the final, and then we'll deal with it. And that's, I think that needs some clarification.
And
I
more
understand.
important, this is not the avenue to which the claims that Act Now makes on various issues about affordable housing are to be refuted or debated. This is not I don't know enough about the affordable. I mean, I'm interested in the affordable housing issue. I'm in favor of it, but I don't know enough about the economics of it all. I recommend all of you do the survey that the Affordable Housing Trust is asking all of the residents, taxpayers and non-taxpayers, to fill out, which I filled out, because Affordable Housing Trust is looking for guidance as to what they should do. But this is not the forum for refuting Act Now claims about affordable housing and things like that. That's not our.
Can I make an observation? I understand what you're saying completely, but I heard what Robin Nides, is that your name? Robin Nides said we're about 1,800 people. So the question I have is, no, I don't think anyone's asking your committee to take a position ever, even now or after the warrant. But what it seems to me is, just from the brief history that I read about your committee, and that you're trying to represent people like me who are not able to vote because we're not full-time, you know, domiciled, let's say in Nantucket, but happen to own property. Hopefully your committee would at least facilitate or assist people like me in getting more information about this proposal, and even possibly getting together a different group than your committee, a separate group perhaps, that of like-minded individuals who may want to strategize and either support, oppose, or otherwise the proposal. And that's why I was getting into the zoning and all the other stuff, because it seems to me that if we could form a group, not you, but some of us would form a group with your assistance, we might be able to come up with a cohesive group of people that are like-minded, that may well seek to oppose the warrant or file our own warrant, if it's unless it's too late.
Too late.
I think you should form your own group, but it's not going to be with we can't do that. We are an appointed body by the select board, and we can't appoint a lobbying group to go fight Act Now. I think you have enough people who are familiar with each other that ought to form the group. Robin's already set up a couple of different type groups that, you know, are intending to do that. And he's a terrific communicator. And I think that, you know, with his help, you guys can form your own group, and then you can refute specifically issue by issue about what Act Now says on this and about affordable housing, but it's not going to be us. Otherwise, we're done. We can't possibly think about. I'm more worried about the land bank and affordable housing than I am about one particular issue. We have to cover all of them, and eventually, when the warrants are finally approved, or at least viewed, and recommendations are made by the FinCom, then we're going to have to talk about that. But we're not going to get in. We just don't have the capacity. Please, no more, Sam. I think you've had enough time. We understand your position. I don't want to fight with lawyers. I'm a lawyer myself.
I just want to ask Robin if he could send me his information so I could do what you suggest. And
Absolutely.
If Robin could just send me an email, and I would be happy to meet with him privately. I appreciate your concern. Thank you very much.
That's great. Robin, it'd be very helpful for you guys.
Robin, I also wanted to be able to join the committee. My name's Michelle Lease, and we own a home on Weymouth Lane.
Great.
And I give you more information, but it sounds like I don't want to get into it. But the one thing I will say though, just from listening to this conversation, I'm on a lot of committees here in my town, and I do a lot of nonprofit work and volunteer work. One thing, and I know you don't want to get into the weeds about this right now, but I do think from an overwhelming standpoint, if this were to get some traction, or were to make some movement, and who knows, you never know what will happen. I think the unintended economic consequences could be really troubling, because I know living on the East Coast, I have about 20 friends, I could count on a couple hands who rent houses for a couple weeks in Nantucket, that it's their happy place. It's their place. They've got stickers on the back of their cars. They love Nantucket. And if that were taken away from them, I mean, they heavily invest in the economy of Nantucket. So I don't know. I just think sort of, I think another group, it sounds like, should be formed, and I would love to volunteer and be a part of it, Robin.
Good. Michelle, I happen to agree with you. I think economically, there's not a chance that it's going to pass. But anyway, Wendy, you had a comment?
Yeah, and Gary, I'm new to this meeting and I'm very interested.
Even though you and I belong to the same club,
Which is what?
G&T.
Oh, the Millbrook G&T?
Yeah, I've been there for 40 years. How about you?
You're kidding. We've been here for 40 years. Are
I
you
know.
in Millbrook
I
now?
know. Yep.
Oh. Well, maybe we'll take this discussion offline, but what I'm interested in is how you get the pulse of the non-voting taxpayers, on issues generally. And is there some sort of database or mechanism or email list?
We depend on our members. All of us live in different communities. We belong to community associations. And that's basically what we do. And we have open meetings like this.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with you on that and think about,
Sure. Okay.
ways to brainstorm.
I'll call you.
Yeah.
Call you.
I'm in the book. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Damien?
Thank you. Again, I understand the lack of desire to get into it, but I wanted to just second what Mr. Nye said. I also just heard about this committee last night. We've owned a home on Nantucket for a number of years and now own a second one as well. And we rely on short-term rentals as an ability to be part of the community. And so, this is an official organization, and official organizations have power, and that's for good reason. And so just one more voice that when you think it appropriate, we would love the opportunity to weigh in, because it would be frankly devastating to our family and our opportunities as part of it, if something like this were to proceed, in addition to me thinking it'd be terrible for Nantucket generally. So thank you. Thanks for the consideration, and we'd love for this committee, which is official committee of the town, to be able to give us an opportunity to be heard, because I do think, if I read your bylaws correctly, we are your constituent, and your constituents would be really heavily negatively impacted in a way that I think is very different from most warrants that would come before the FinCom.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish we had the power. You say we can't even get a chance to speak at an annual meeting, but at an annual town meeting, but okay, we're going to have more of this. Donald Green.
I would just advise those who want to join the committee that we are slated to 15 members, and currently we only have 11. So there are 4 slots open to join the committee. And I guess we could even ask one time to expand it.
Yes. Anyone else? Yes. John?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Delano, my wife and I, Jane and I, have a house on Nantucket we've had for 40 years. And so I'm clearly a non-voting resident taxpayer on the island. And I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for your words and for your encouragement on this. And I want to identify with what Peter Kahn said. I think this is a very important issue. And I can certainly understand from a process standpoint why you want to wait until you see what the final proposal is. But again, I want to join the others on here in encouraging you to, as a committee, as a group, to take a serious look at whatever that final warrant is. I will say, I know in talking to Kathy Baird, I believe in response to Wendy's question, in terms of organizations out there, I know we're part of the Tom Nevers Civic Association. There are lots of civic associations on this island, and that may be one way to reach out to other non-voting residents in terms of connections one way or the other. But bottom line, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for what you're doing and what this committee is doing.
No, you can be sure we will be looking at this particular issue when the FinCom finally makes the recommendation. And it may well be that we look at that and say, that's a lousy idea. We should recommend that the select board disapprove it, or at least make our position known so that at least the voters at the annual town meeting know that it's something we recommend against. So that's the end of our discussion. I'm sorry some of you would like to get into the weeds on this, but it's very difficult for us to, we are not the foil to battle Act Now's claims. I saw their recent letter. I don't agree with it, but somebody else has to take up that battle. And Robin Nyes is clearly capable. He's a good organizer. He, as I say, a good communicator. And I think you're in great hands. And he can effectively mount a much better defense than our committee, which has a lot of other issues that we're going to have to focus on between now. I'm amazed when you think about the issues going to the annual town meeting. There are questions about how to use, I don't know if that comes to the meeting, how to use all the money that we're getting for pandemic, or the money we're not spending on the July 4th fireworks or whatever. We have the land bank issues, the Affordable Housing Trust. There may be some other issues like that. Some towns have just gone with big bond offerings. I was looking at some of the materials people sent me where, towns really wanted to move that affordable housing needle. And they went out and they took out, $100 million bond issue, long-term type of municipal bonds. I don't know if that's something our town, we're talking about 20 million, but that seems not to be sufficient for us to plan, long-term needs and affordable housing in Nantucket. But there's a lot of people talking about it, and certainly the Affordable Housing Trust is reaching out now. I'm part of a focus group that's coming up in a few weeks, but they have a study or a survey that they're asking people to fill out. They really want to know what you folks think, what all of us who are taxpayers and non-taxpayers, what residents of the island feel about, the affordable housing issue. To me, one of the questions I have is, to me, a very important question is affordable housing the most important issue on the island? Is it? Then stop worrying about all the other stuff and all the other budget stuff. Go fix it. But right now, you have each interest group pushing for something they need. The people in our island home, they want to spend $50 million to keep people in their same location so they have a view of the water, right? Other people want to spend the same amount on affordable housing. There are a lot of other issues, and about the Act Now issue. I don't want to get into that. So it's very interesting in our years of experience. I don't remember there being that many substantially controversial issues coming before the annual town meeting. And the thing that's sad, in my view, the saddest part about that is that this is an annual town meeting that may or may not be held, depending upon our progress with COVID vaccinations. I'm delighted to tell you all I've had my second vaccination shot, so I'm okay for now. As I was saying, the sad thing is that this is a time with all of these very substantial Nantucket issues to be dealt with, to think of having the annual town meeting, outdoors in a high school lot may or may not come off. And it would be great if the pandemic was not here and if all of the concerned citizens of Nantucket, could actually show up and be there and talk about those issues. Today, with the pandemic, even trying to take some safety issues by having the annual town meeting in an open area, the parking lot of the high school, I think the attendance will be modest, and that's a shame. And in the past, the attendance has been modest because people don't give a damn. And not just here, as you know, in our national elections, it used to be the same way. This this national election, they gave a damn. And as you know, we had the most voting we've ever had in many, 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 many years for our presidential election. So here's another example of where people are getting worked up on a number of issues. And I'm personally sorry that the pandemic is going to prevent there being the kind of turnout that that should be held. It should be held. But anyway, that's just my thought process. Okay, so the next question is, do we know when the FinCom meeting is? We don't even know when the FinCom is reviewing this, sometime in March, from what I recall, Kathy, is that right?
Yes, Denise said she promised as soon as she's scheduled it, she will let us know. And currently she thinks it will either be the 2nd or the 4th of March. These are open meetings, just like ours is an open meeting. So once it's announced, anybody can Zoom in on it. It's a public meeting. And they can speak as individuals.
And Kathy, my other question is with respect to the FinCom, there are several other issues on which we may want to take a position once they are finalized. Do we know when the FinCom, in other words, how do we know when these issues are coming up?
Well, they post an agenda just like we do. So they're required to post their agenda, I think 3 or 4 days before they hold a meeting. So if you just go look on the town website, you'll see our agenda and you'll see theirs as well. So that's how anybody can find it out when they need to.
That's a good idea. Maybe there's a way, Kathy, you should be, when the FinCom does list their agenda, when they're talking about going over warrant articles, you ought to circulate that to us so that we are aware of what's coming up, because different items may come up at different FinCom meetings. And
I can do that. They're already looking at some of the articles. They have been for a while. So I think every meeting they have at least one. I can.
yeah, they're mostly zoning, I think, that they looked at, or financial ones so far, according to Denise.
I can circulate that if you'd like me. I'll look every day or as often as I can and see what's out.
Okay. Okay. That's the end of our business for today. The question is, we don't have a scheduled speaker for the next meeting. And maybe I think we should take a break because nothing's going to happen between now and the early March anyway. So let me just see when should we hold our next meeting?
Just so you know, Gary, I can't host it either the 6th or the 13th of March, or 16th, 13th, or 20th.
Well, should we tentatively schedule it? Well, you can't host it the 6th or the 13th?
Or the 20th of March. I'll be traveling those 3 Saturdays, but I can
wow.
do it. I can do it this month.
Well, let's tentatively think about meeting on the 27th, but I'm not sure we'll have a real agenda for us to talk about, but nothing may be determined by then. So why don't we just tentatively schedule a meeting for the 27th of February? But between now and then, I'd like to hear from committee members if there's any particular subjects they'd like to talk about. Or speakers that we should try to line up. We were
The ones
talking
that we've
about,
had in the place are
Rob Rainey, but he hasn't really responded.
right. The ones we had on the list before included transportation issues, parking, alternative energy initiatives, Lauren Sinatra.
You know, I had a great idea, by the way, but I don't know if we want to take it to me. You know, I watched the I watch the select board meeting and I watch the HDC meetings from time to time. And one of the ideas I saw was that they had a discussion about a proposal to permit solar. Someone wanted to get a solar paneling on their roof, and they turned it down. And some people on the HDC decided that they didn't like it on the north side. It had to be on the south side or something like that. And the couple was very upset. And when the HDC turned it down, they appealed it to the select board. And there was a very interesting hearing at the select board 2 meetings ago, not this Wednesday, but the meeting before, I think it was. And unfortunately, the select board felt constrained to support the HDC because theoretically, in theory, they are required only to overturn this HDC when they find their decisions to be arbitrary and capricious. But almost unanimously, every member of the select board said, you know, we're turning this down. We're not approving the appeal. We're turning it down, but we feel terrible because we want to encourage solar. We think it's really healthy for the long term of the island. And here we have to turn it down just because, you know, we're only supposed to overrule if it's arbitrary and capricious. We can't find this completely to be arbitrary and capricious. So I came up with this brilliant solution one day. I said, you know what? I don't know if our committee is the one to think about this. So we ought to make putting solar, either roofs or installations, you know, on your property a merit, a badge of honor, a badge of honor. We ought to get people to start thinking about the fact that, gee, anyone that starts moving towards solar is going to help us save the island, to save us from putting in a third line, you know, cable line for electricity. It's going to reduce our carbon footprint, you know. Somehow we need to start thinking about that. I don't know if it's worthwhile getting, you know, the town's power person, Nancy, what's her name, Sinatra? I forget.
Harry, I thought that again, I haven't studied this, but I thought there was a sort of a solar farm proposal, or may already be in existence, whereby a large portion of town property will have solar paneling. And so in other words, this doesn't have to be on people's roofs to do this necessarily.
No, it just so happens that I'm familiar with that, Peter. I'll tell you what it is, since we have a few minutes. Wanna Comet has a great big piece of property, and it should have been where the new hospital was built, but the people in Monomoy,
right,
I assume, mounted a campaign. They didn't want the helicopters flying over their houses or something like that. So eventually they kept the hospital where it is, but the solar approval was approved quickly by the HDC and the town. And the Monomoy residents are already opposing it, even though it doesn't affect them at all. It's a gigantic solar ground display. It won't be seen by anyone.
And it's NIMBY. It's another NIMBY issue, but sure. Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, of course.
Fabulous. And
right.
But as I say, it's something we ought to think about, how we as a committee can encourage that. And to me, the best way to do it, you know, is to make it a badge of honor. People who want to go to the, you know, the people who made the application to the HDC agreed that they could put covering on the panels to make sure they were black so it didn't distract from the neighborhood. And HDC they took an unnecessary stance. And we should be encouraging that, and our committee probably ought to figure a way to do that. But anyway, I think that people can think about that. If anybody has any thoughts about possible subjects or speakers for February 27th, why don't you let me and Kathy know soon, and we can.
Is there somebody else? Is there some other way we can,
Yeah.
I mean, I personally can't be there on the 27th either, but is there some other way that we can host these? I mean, it does sound a little premature to be meeting on the 27th. I mean, is there some other way we can host these in early March, or?
Yeah, we can move it to when Kathy's here. Kathy sent me the instructions. I will learn.
Yeah.
I'll learn how to do
That's
it.
just another, I just throw that out as another possibility.
Okay, I'll learn how to do it. Maybe we're better off waiting until, although No, it won't be me taking the minutes. It'll be Bill Sherman again. Oh, he doesn't know it yet. He's not, there he is. Yeah, Bill. Hey, Bill, you might have to be.
Sharpen your pencil, Bill.
The minutes.
Well, you can do it in the
By the way, do you know
report.
how to do these Zoom things? Bill, you're on mute.
I think Peter Holly wanted to speak.
Peter, Holly, do you know how to do the Zoom things?
No, I'm the person responsible for keeping Bill off the subcommittee by not recognizing that I had to admit people after we got rolling. So I'm not sure, but I do know how to do it. It's not a big deal. I don't know how to handle the towns.
Okay, well, Kathy can help you with that.
Yeah, but I was going to say just a item of amusement maybe for you all, that if you need a solar power speaker, I understand that there's a very articulate fellow that you've already heard from. I think it was last meeting, Tobias Glidden, who is one of the solar, the home solar suppliers.
Yes, that's his business. That's his business. We're not gonna let him advertise, so I don't think so. But no, I was thinking about that. If we came up with that proposal, he'd be a strong advocate of that because that's his business. Anyway, so should we just schedule our next meeting for March 6th? And between
That would be a good idea because the FinCom would have possibly met by then. So it
Yes.
was better to do it then.
Okay, let's schedule it for March 6th. And the subject will be review of FinCom's recommendations.
Yeah, the other amusing thing is that one of the reasons probably that Denise was not at our meeting today is that FinCom was meeting at 10:45 today.
Oh,
So,
okay, that's a good reason.
They are meeting, I think, very often because they have this long warrant to work through.
Yeah, they got a lot of stuff to do. Okay, everybody, I'll take a meeting to adjourn.
So moved.
Anyone?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, aye, okay. Everyone stay safe. And we'll see you next on March 6th. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.